They dragged her out of her seat because they didn't know who she was. 1 hour later, she made a single phone call, and their $5 billion future vanished. This isn't just a story about racism. It's a masterclass in power, dignity, and consequences. Watch to the end, because what she does next will give you chills. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The sun rose lazily over the San Francisco skyline, casting long golden streaks across the glass towers of the financial district. At precisely 7:02 a.m., a sleek black Tesla Model X rolled silently up to Terminal 3 of SFO International Airport. Out stepped a woman who looked like she owned the entire tarmac. And in a way, she did. Camille Dorsey was not just any traveler. At 51, she was one of the most powerful figures in global commerce. CEO of Monarch Mobility, the tech-driven logistics empire responsible for over a third of North America's executive transportation infrastructure. Her signature didn't just move money, it moved economies. But to the untrained eye, this morning, she was just another black woman in a sharp gray suit with a leather tote slung over her shoulder. That would prove to be a billion-dollar mistake. Camille had built her company from the ground up, starting with a laptop, a rented co-working desk, and a bone-deep refusal to be underestimated. She hadn't been born into legacy wealth or Ivy League connections. What she had was grit. Grit, and a work ethic forged in 80-hour weeks, back-to-back failures, and one too many you people moments in boardrooms full of glass ceilings and glazed-over stairs. This morning's flight, Gate 58B, Monarch class on Ventura Air, wasn't just a business trip. It was a field test. Ventura Air was the finalist in a silent competition. The winner would receive Monarch Mobility's largest ever corporate travel contract, $5.1 billion over 10 years. Camille wanted to experience Ventura the way her staff, clients, and partners would. No private jet, no red carpet greeting, just her, a boarding pass, and the premium experience. She wanted to see how the airline treated people who didn't come wrapped in privilege. And she didn't have to wait long. At the premium check-in counter, a young woman with a crisp Ventura Air name tag and the practiced smile of someone who's had corporate hospitality drilled into her blinked when she saw Camille approach. "Hi. First-class check-in, right?" Camille said, placing her phone with the digital boarding pass on the scanner. The agent's smile faltered. Are you sure you're at the right line?" she asked, glancing at Camille's face, and then down to the name on the boarding pass as if waiting for the screen to correct itself. Camille's expression didn't change. She was used to this. She leaned in, her voice calm and unwavering. "Yes, I'm sure. Camille Dorsey, Seat 1A." The agent hesitated before scanning the pass. A red light flashed momentarily, not unusual, but the woman's eyes widened. "I'm going to need to verify something," she said. Camille gave a small nod. "Of course." As the agent disappeared behind a frosted glass divider, Camille stood motionless, her gaze steady. Behind her, Two white businessmen in golf polos and noise-canceling headphones were waved through without so much as a second glance. By the time the agent returned, this time with a supervisor, the awkward tension in the air had grown noticeable. "We're just doing a routine security verification," the supervisor said, though her tone wasn't exactly routine. "Sometimes our system flags certain names." "Names," Camille repeated, her brow arching slightly. "And what name flagged it? Camille Dorsey?" The supervisor said nothing, only asked for Camille's ID again and scribbled something discreetly on her boarding pass before handing it back. Camille said nothing more. She'd seen it all before: the patronizing smiles, the veiled surprise, the unspoken question behind their eyes. "How did you afford this? Why are you here?" But what they didn't realize was that Camille had learned long ago how to weaponize underestimation. At security, the routine check became a second screening. Her laptop was swabbed twice, her tote unpacked item by item, and a TSA agent examined the engraved pen her late father had gifted her, as if it might be concealing a bomb instead of memories. Another agent dropped her tablet by accident. No apology. Camille just smiled tightly and moved on. By the time she reached the gate, boarding had already begun. Her boarding group, Group 1, had just been called. She approached, extended her pass again. The gate agent looked at it, blinked, and said, "Wait 1 second," before whispering something to a nearby colleague. Camille felt the eyes. She always did. Some passengers looked with curiosity, some with confusion. A few, mostly men in tailored suits, looked with something that sat somewhere between suspicion and discomfort. She was used to that too. After an additional ID check, Camille was finally allowed through. Inside the jet bridge, she paused a moment, letting the hum of the engines and the stale, recycled air of flight greet her like an old rival. Then she boarded. First class was sparsely filled. Half a dozen passengers already sipping champagne and scrolling phones. Camille found her seat easily. 1A. Window. Ample legroom. A leather-bound amenities kit and warm towel waited for her on the tray. She sat down, adjusted her blazer, and took out a folder marked "Confidential." Inside was the final draft of the Ventura contract, signed by their legal team. All that was needed was her signature. She was about to uncork a future for Ventura Air that would rewrite their financial history. That's when she saw it. The glance. A male flight attendant looked her way, then did a double take. His expression didn't shift into a smile. He just stared, then looked down at the manifest, then back at her. And then he started walking over. Camille looked up, expression unreadable. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Camille tilted her head. "You scanned it at the door. Is there an issue?" "We just need to reconfirm seating assignments. There's been a system discrepancy." There it was, the seed of something familiar. She handed him the pass. He took it, stared, then walked away again without another word. Camille leaned back in her seat. The storm was coming, and they had no idea who they'd just tried to erase. Camille adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, watching the flight attendant disappear behind the curtain separating first class from the galley. It wasn't the first time she had been questioned about a seat, but this felt more calculated. Not uncertainty, not human error. Intent. She glanced around. The other first-class passengers had settled into their plush leather recliners. The man across the aisle from her, mid-60s with salt and pepper hair and a Rolex that caught the light too well, gave her a once-over, not curious, judging. The seat beside her remained empty. 1B, reserved, according to her manifest, for Ventura Air's chief client officer, a woman she'd met once at a trade gala, all sparkle and sharp smiles. Camille wondered if she'd boarded yet. Just then, the flight attendant returned, not alone. A second uniformed man, taller, bulkier, clearly in some sort of supervisory role, followed him down the aisle. He didn't make eye contact as he approached, just motioned to Camille. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step into the galley with us for a moment." Camille's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Is there a problem?" "There's just a seating issue we need to clear up. It'll just take a second." Camille didn't move. "My seat is 1A. Confirmed, scanned, and printed on my boarding pass." "Yes, well," he coughed, adjusting the lapel of his jacket. "There's been a change." "A change," she repeated slowly. "To a seat I purchased weeks ago, for a flight I boarded on time, with documentation approved by your check-in team, your security team, and your gate agent." He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, I understand, but we've had a last-minute manifest shift." Camille exhaled slowly through her nose. "And this shift doesn't affect any other first-class passenger?" Silence. She didn't wait for an answer. "Let me guess. You want me to move?" The second man nodded slightly, avoiding her eyes. "We've reassigned you to seat 23B. It's a standard economy seat. Aisle." The words dropped between them like lead. The man across the aisle coughed, choked, really, and let out a short laugh, then turned it into a polite cough when Camille's eyes flicked toward him. "I see," Camille said. Her voice was still, dangerous. "And this reassignment was made after I boarded, or before?" "Just now," he said quickly. "No warning, no explanation, no comparable seat offered." He cleared his throat. "We don't have any others in first. We're over capacity." Camille leaned forward slightly, her voice steady as steel. "Over capacity, and the solution is to remove the only black woman in the cabin." He flinched. She didn't. Behind her, a younger woman was entering the cabin. A stewardess in training, perhaps. She paused mid-step, watching the exchange, then quickly ducked back out. Camille caught the hesitation. "Let me be clear," Camille said, her voice carrying now, not shouting, but just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm not moving. My boarding pass is valid. My ID has been checked. I am in the correct seat. If you're suggesting otherwise, I need your reason. Documented." The second man's lips thinned into a line. "Ma'am, if you do not comply, we will be forced to call security." There it was. The escalation. The system's favorite tool when diplomacy fails. Force. And Camille knew exactly how that played out. She reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. With deliberate, graceful movements, she opened the camera, set it to video, and placed it on the tray in front of her. "Then I suggest," she said calmly, "that you do." He blinked. "I'll wait." A beat passed. The flight attendant shifted nervously, clearly regretting the moment he handed this issue to his superior. Camille's presence, her calm, her authority, was starting to draw attention. The man in 2C leaned forward now, sensing drama. Across the aisle, someone else had already raised their phone to record. The supervisor huffed, clearly debating whether to press the issue. Camille's voice lowered, but grew colder. "You do realize I'm recording this? That your attempt to relocate me, after confirming my identity and my ticket, might constitute grounds for legal action? I'm asking you to be reasonable." I'm asking you to be lawful. He stared at her, and then, like cowards tend to do when they feel watched, he turned and walked away. But Camille knew better. This wasn't over. Moments later, she spotted them. Two uniformed airport security officers walking briskly down the aisle toward her. Not flight staff, not customer service. Enforcers. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, but fury held tightly under control. Her phone was still recording. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice clipped. "We've received a report that you're refusing to comply with flight staff instructions." Camille looked directly at him. "I am sitting in my assigned seat. I've presented valid ID, a boarding pass, and I've complied with all requests thus far." The officer didn't respond. Camille straightened her spine, her voice lowering to something colder, sharper. "Are you removing me based on a documented issue? Or because I don't look like I belong in first class?" That question hung in the air, taut and charged. For the first time, the officer hesitated. Passengers were now fully engaged. Phones up, expressions curious, some whispering. One woman, 2 rows back, began muttering, "This isn't right." And just then, like a bomb exploding in a library, the man across the aisle leaned forward and said smugly, "Honestly, I don't think she belongs here anyway. Some people just don't fit the environment." The air turned heavy. Camille turned slowly to face him. Her eyes narrowed, but her tone remained elegant. "Don't confuse your discomfort with my inappropriateness." He blinked. "Let me educate you, since it seems your upbringing fell short," she continued, voice like glass. "Class is not measured by race, and luxury is not reserved for your reflection. I belong here because I earned it. You, however, are still trying to figure out how to share space with someone who looks like me." The officer, silent until now, shifted. "I believe that's enough, sir," he said to the man across the aisle. Camille turned back, calm once more. "If you still plan to remove me," she said to the officer, "know this: I'll comply. But only after you state, clearly and on the record, the legal grounds for your action." More phones lifted. A man in the 3rd row began muttering about lawsuits. The officer, for the first time, looked uncertain. Camille waited. The purser returned, quietly leaned over, and whispered something in the officer's ear. Something about the passenger list. The officer looked at Camille, then back at the purser, then exhaled sharply. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said stiffly. "You may remain in your seat." Camille said nothing, but inside she smiled, because the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. Just as Camille began settling back into her seat, the buzz in the cabin hadn't quite faded. People were still whispering, some nodding toward her with curiosity or quiet respect. The supervisor had slinked away, and security had retreated, but the tension hadn't fully left. She sipped her water, tapped her screen to resume reviewing the final edits of a pitch deck. Her mind wasn't on slides, though. It was spinning. She had never been dragged to this edge before, and something inside told her this wasn't the last of it. Then it happened. Ding. An email popped up on her tablet. Subject: Urgent. Deal delay, Ventura Air. Camille's eyebrows tightened. She tapped to open it. "Camille, just received word from the board. Due to an escalation with in-flight personnel and perceived risks, Ventura is requesting to delay the final signature on the $4.8 billion logistics partnership. They've cited ongoing reputational concerns. We're trying to get clarity, but it looks like something's already reached their executive inboxes. More soon. Amit. She stared at the message. The dots connected instantly. Someone, likely on the flight crew, had already sent a report, framing her, twisting the narrative before she even left the ground. It hadn't just been an attempt to humiliate her. It was a premeditated move to kill the deal. Camille's hands clenched, but her face remained neutral. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was business. A knife slid under the surface of an empire she'd spent decades building. And then, she saw it. A second email, this time from a confidential contact at Ventura. Camille, off the record, your name came up in an internal incident bulletin. Something about security refusal and combative language. Did something happen at boarding? I trust you. But this is moving fast. D. The playbook was clear. Discredit her. Flip the story. Use coded language. Difficult, aggressive, uncooperative, to sink her credibility, all while hiding behind policies. But what they didn't know? Camille had recorded everything. The footage was still running. Clean, undeniable, high-quality proof. And more than that, she had power. She reached for her phone, her fingers now steady. She typed 3 words in a message to her communications director. Time to fire. Not an employee. A signal. A protocol. Something she never hoped to use, but always kept ready. Across 3 cities, a team of PR and legal specialists would already be preparing statements, pushing media contacts, drafting narrative control strategies. They wanted to play politics. Camille was about to remind them what power really looked like. And this time, the world would be watching. The plane hadn't even left the tarmac when the consequences started to take shape. Camille Lorenz, CEO of Lorenz Global Logistics, architect of a multi-billion-dollar supply chain empire, and until an hour ago, the silent decision-maker behind the future of Ventura Air, sat in seat 1A, eyes forward, calm, still. But make no mistake, this wasn't the same woman who had quietly accepted microaggressions over the years. Not anymore. She was done playing quiet. Across the aisle, the flight attendant, who had questioned her for the 3rd time about her seat, nervously straightened her jacket and whispered to her colleague. Word had spread. Security had retreated, but Camille hadn't. And the cabin knew it. What no one yet understood. This wasn't going to end when the flight landed. Camille's team had received the signal. Time to fire wasn't a metaphor. It was a code phrase they'd built into company protocols, a trigger for a crisis PR response, legal prep, and contract freeze notices. By the time the aircraft leveled at 30,000 feet, Camille's name was trending on social media. Not because she made a scene. She didn't raise her voice once. Not because she broke protocol. She followed every single rule. But because someone in row 2 had filmed the entire interaction, from Camille's professional composure to the visibly flustered flight staff. The video had been uploaded under the title, Black CEO, Harassed in First Class. Is this what flying looks like in 2025? 750,000 views in under 40 minutes. Camille's assistant back in Chicago sent a message to her in-flight Wi-Fi inbox. Camille, this is going viral. Our media team's already spinning it. LA Times wants a comment. A BC just called. Your move. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened a file on her tablet, a live document called Equity by Design. It was a campaign she had sketched years ago, but had never needed to launch. Not until today. Her idea had been simple: build a public platform that holds airlines, travel hubs, and corporations accountable for their passenger treatment. A rating system driven by real experiences, not just VIP lounges and free champagne, but respect, humanity, fairness. She had never launched it because, truthfully, she thought change could come quietly, but not anymore. She added a single line to the top of the document: the world doesn't need another apology. It needs a system. She hit save. Suddenly, there was a knock on the divider behind her seat. A different flight attendant now, one who had avoided the earlier confrontation, leaned in with a sheepish smile. "Ms. Lawrence," he began, his voice careful now, rehearsed. "The captain would like to offer his personal apologies for the earlier inconvenience. He's asked if there's anything he can do to make your flight more comfortable." Camille tilted her head slightly. "Is this apology on record?" she asked. The attendant blinked. I don't believe so." "Then no thank you," she said, returning to her screen. "I don't need comfort. I need accountability." He didn't know what to say, so he nodded, backed away, and disappeared behind the curtain. Meanwhile, in the economy section, a middle-aged black woman in row 23 whispered to the man next to her, "That's Camille Laurens, the one they tried to kick out of her seat." Her seatmate widened his eyes. "The logistics mogul?" She nodded. "That one. She's not just in 1A. She's the reason flights like this still exist." The murmur passed backward, row to row, and something began to shift: respect, admiration, and a fire that had been waiting, quietly, for someone to show them what refusing to shrink actually looks like. Back in 1A, Camille looked out the window. The clouds below formed a soft, endless blanket. Above them, clear blue stretched to the horizon. She thought of her mother, who used to say, "Don't ever let them confuse your silence for permission." Today, Camille's silence was gone, and now the world would hear her voice. Suddenly, her assistant messaged again. "FYI, Ventura just issued a statement. They've seen the video. They're deeply concerned. Want a private call before 4 p.m. Camille's fingers hovered over the keys, then typed, "Decline. Tell them to submit a public apology and policy change proposal before Friday. Or we go to Continental." The stakes had changed. She wasn't negotiating from her knees. She was standing tall, and now the whole industry was watching. By the time Flight 907 began its descent into Los Angeles, the cabin had shifted from whispers to wide-eyed awareness. What started as an uncomfortable moment in seat 1A had become the most watched flight on Earth, without the passengers even knowing it. Camille Laurens remained poised, eyes forward, hands folded neatly over her tablet. She wasn't just thinking about how this would end. She was planning what it would begin. Back at Lauren's global headquarters in Chicago, her executive team was already in overdrive. Press teams had crafted a statement, scheduled a press conference, and assembled a response package for both internal and external stakeholders. But it was the movement Camille was about to launch that would send shockwaves through the skies. They'd named it First Class Citizen, a simple idea with seismic energy. Everyone, regardless of race, status, gender, or wealth, deserves to be treated with dignity, especially in spaces built on privilege. It wasn't just a hashtag. It was a challenge, a reckoning, a choice. And that choice would now belong to every airline. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the terminal, Camille's inbox buzzed with 3 new messages. One from the CEO of Ventura Air. one from her legal team, and one from a woman named Anita, a flight attendant from row 26. I saw what happened. I've seen it too many times. If you speak, I'll stand with you. That message hit Camille differently. It wasn't from the C-suite. It wasn't crafted or strategic. It was real. It reminded her of why this mattered, not just for her, but for every woman, every black traveler, every person who had ever been made to feel small at 35,000 feet. As the doors opened and passengers began to disembark, more than a few paused to glance at Camille, not with pity, but with respect. Some nodded silently. One man simply said, "Thank you," before stepping into the jet bridge. Then, unexpectedly, the captain himself appeared at the cabin door. "Ms. Lawrence," he began, his tone careful, "I want to personally apologize for the experience you had today. It doesn't reflect our values." Camille met his eyes. "But it does reflect your systems," she replied. Calm. "Director." He looked down, then quietly stepped aside. As she walked off the plane, cameras were already waiting. Her story had broken the sound barrier. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off. But Camille didn't stop. Not yet. She had one more stop to make. Continental Airlines, a company that had been runner-up in her original contract negotiations. Now, they were first in line. At their HQ, Camille met with the board and laid out not just an offer, but an ultimatum. Sign the partnership and implement industry-first anti-bias standards across every customer-facing role. Train, audit, and report quarterly, or lose the deal. They didn't hesitate. They signed. Ventura Air's CEO, meanwhile, was still leaving voicemails. The world had moved on. Camille had not only taken back her seat, she'd reclaimed the narrative. And for the first time in a long time, the altitude wasn't just measured in feet. It was measured in integrity. And Camille Laurent, she had just climbed higher than any plane ever could. Camille stood before a sea of faces in a conference hall packed to the walls at Spelman College. Young women, black, brilliant, and bold, listened not just with interest, but with recognition. Her voice wasn't just a story. It was a mirror, a reflection of battles they knew too well. Behind her, the giant LED screen lit up with bold white letters against a royal blue background. Number 1, first-class citizen, a new standard in global travel. What had started as an incident became an industry movement. In just 6 weeks, 6 airlines had signed onto Camille's first-class citizen commitment, including Continental, who now proudly carried the Lawrence Global Travel contract. They weren't just partners. They were pioneers. As she spoke, Camille didn't once mention vengeance. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The world already knew. Instead, she talked about power. The kind you carry when you know your worth. The kind that sits quietly beside you in row 1A, whether people see it or not. Dignity, she said to the crowd, isn't a luxury seat. It's a birthright. And when we allow people to assign value to us based on how we look, how we sound, or where we sit, we're giving them a power they never earned. The room erupted in applause, but Camille simply smiled. She had nothing to prove. Not anymore. Later that night, as she boarded a flight, not in a private jet, but in the same first-class seat she'd once been told wasn't hers, Camille felt something deeper than triumph. She felt peace. The crew greeted her by name, not because they feared headlines, but because they'd been trained, sensitized, and transformed, not by a lawsuit, not by a fine, but by a woman who had the power to say no, and the vision to make that no mean something. As the plane ascended into the dark velvet sky, Camille looked out the window. The stars above were no different than before. But something inside her had shifted. This time, the altitude wasn't measured in feet. It was measured in legacy. And in reclaiming her space, she'd carved out room for countless others to rise. Camille Laurence never set out to start a movement. She boarded that plane simply as a passenger, a woman in a perfectly tailored gray suit with a boarding pass for seat 1A. She wasn't chasing attention, didn't arrive with a camera crew, and never imagined she'd be dragged down the aisle of an aircraft, humiliated, belittled, and dehumanized. But that moment, seared into the memory of every witness and broadcast across the internet within hours, was never really about her boarding pass. It was about something far deeper. It was about the audacity of presence. The idea that a successful black woman, no matter how accomplished, could still be viewed as a trespasser in spaces she'd already earned her way into. Camille had spent a lifetime building Lauren's Global from the ground up, navigating boardrooms, building trust across continents, and rewriting the way corporate travel was done. She'd inked deals that shaped international markets. She had weathered microaggressions, double standards, and all the quiet dismissals that come with being the only one in the room. But even with all of that, even with $5 billion of influence in her inbox, she was still seen by a flight crew and airport security as someone who didn't belong. That's what made her response so powerful. Camille didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't cower. She made a call. One call. And that call shifted the sky. By canceling the $5 billion deal with the airline that had violated her dignity, she didn't just walk away. She walked forward. She held that company accountable with the only language it truly understood: consequence. But here's what's even more incredible. Camille didn't stop at retribution. She used the platform she gained to uplift others. She redirected that energy into partnerships, reform, and education. She created the First-Class Citizen Commitment, an initiative aimed at redefining how passengers are treated, regardless of their skin color, gender, or appearance. She became the face of a movement, not because she wanted to be, but because the world needed someone who wouldn't sit quietly while being told to move. Camille's story holds a profound lesson for every one of us. You don't need permission to exist in spaces you've earned. You don't need to explain your presence, shrink yourself for comfort, or wait for validation to speak up when wronged. Your worth isn't conditional. It isn't defined by others' perception. And when someone tries to challenge your right to belong, whether it's in a boardroom, on a plane, in a classroom, or even in your own community, you have every right to say, "I will not be moved." But Camille also teaches us that how we respond to injustice matters. Her strength came not just from resistance, but from restraint and redirection. She didn't let rage control the narrative. She channeled her power with intention. She made change happen, not just for herself, but for everyone else who would come after her. Her broken moment became a blueprint. You may not be a CEO. You may not hold billion-dollar contracts in your hands, but that doesn't mean you don't have power. Power comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the power to speak up in a meeting where your ideas are overlooked. Sometimes it's the courage to call out injustice in your workplace or your neighborhood. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let someone else tell you what box you belong in. And when the system tries to silence you, don't just walk away in anger. Walk away with strategy. Redirect your energy towards something greater. Use your voice, your network, your platform, however big or small, to create impact. Even if you don't change the world overnight, you can change your corner of it, and that ripple will reach farther than you think. If Camille Laurence's story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own experiences, or if it inspired you to take your seat with a little more pride today, we want to hear from you. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been told you didn't belong? How did you respond? Your story matters, and your voice just might be the one that gives someone else the courage to rise. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories of dignity, of justice, of quiet revolutionaries who refuse to be erased, then do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Click the bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. We're building something here, not just content, but a community, a collective of people who believe in accountability, in representation, and in truth, told boldly. Let's keep the sky open for everyone, because the next time someone says, "This seat isn't for you," you'll know exactly how to respond. You'll take your seat anyway, because it always was.